I have created a clean separation of concerns for my work-based browser so that only Slack and Okta open things in it.
What were your concerns?
My concerns are new job. They stipulate you should use this browser and these are the security settings that you should have.
Okay.
And more importantly, new job, we use Slack. And I was finding it absolutely infuriating when you click on links in Slack, which I use for work only, and it would open in whatever the default browser was. So what I wanted to do was when I'm in Slack and I click on a link, it opens those links in the designated work browser.
Did you solve this by just going to web-based Slack in that browser, and therefore it's already in the right browser and you don't need to have the Slack app open at all?
Repeat that. I'm not sure I got all of that.
You can access Slack without the app. It's just a web app. You go to slack.com, log in, and you can access it in a tab in your work browser. And then you never have to worry about the links opening in another browser because you're already in a browser and they just open in the next tab along.
So I did start with that. But I wanted the app in a separate window so that, because I do tiling now, it would be tiled and correctly sized and placed in the right spot in my workplace so that, Slack just takes up the right amount of space and not all of the space.
Please, sir, I have a solution for that as well. And the solution for that is you create an app window for Slack, and therefore it is in another place, and you can resolve all of those things without having the Slack app installed, if that's your desire.
Yeah, except that it will still open links in the wrong browser, right?
It will not, because it is a tab, a detached tab of the browser, your work browser. So it is a possible thing. I'm sorry I'm hijacking your segment. I apologize.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't have Alan as a friend, who's just pointed out the bleeding obvious, let's go for a more complicated solution.
Yes, let's.
So I did start by doing that, but I didn't like it in a browser window. I wanted the actual Slack application. And also it helps with the way that the authentication works. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So the principal thing is, new job, I have a Mac for when I'm traveling. That's great. And they have a bring your own device policy. So I've been setting up Linux, on the desktop to do stuff from a workstation. And what I wanted to do was, when I'm in Slack, click a link and it open in the work browser because that's the only place it needs to be. And you'd think that would be easy, but it turns out it's not. Thankfully, there is a hero on the internet who wrote a bit of software called XDG Override. And if you're familiar with sort of the internals of desktop Linux, you may have come across XDG. It's one of the free desktop specifications. It's responsible for all manner of things like the names of the default folders you get in your home directory and where environment variables point to cache directories and data directories and configuration directories and things of that nature. And there is also some XDG utilities, one of which is XDG Open. And it's responsible for interpreting the MIME types of files or URLs and opening those with the appropriate application. But when it comes to web browsers, it basically has one scheme, which is it a URL? What is the default browser? Singular. Let's open it in that.
Mm-hmm.
And what XDG Override allows you to do is to inject a modified version of XDG Open into the path of an application, which is modified to open URL schemes in different browser applications. So this is where we blow Alan's solution out of the water because it enables us to do a few more things. So let's just pretend that we're not worried about Slack anymore. What we're able to do with XDG Open is say, well, I want all URLs that start with the Spotify URL pattern to open the Spotify client. And if you're using one of the desktop YouTube clients, you can open all YouTube URLs in that YouTube client or your Twitch viewer or whatever it might be. And more importantly, what you can also do is specify just sort of URL patterns that should also open in a particular browser. So what I've been able to do is put together a list of all of the URLs that are the starting phrase of the various authentication services we use for work, some of which that are internal for refreshing our tokens, or some which are for doing the identity management through Google and Okta and all the rest of it, or bouncing through the Slack OAuth pattern and all the rest of it. And all of those URLs, when they are encountered by any application, will now open in my preferred work-based browser.
I can see a benefit to this beyond the clicking a link in Slack, because I've also found that sometimes I uncover a link to a Slack chat. Like someone will say, we discussed this here, and that might be in an email, and you're in your email client. And when you click that link, it would open in whatever your default browser is, which might not be signed into Slack. Whereas what you're doing would mean if I click a Slack link, it would send that straight to the Slack client, and then I'd get straight to the chat more quickly. That makes more sense.
Yeah. So XDG Override is the tool that does this. We'll have a link to the project on GitHub, and also a fascinating blog post written by the author, which is quite tongue-in-cheek and an entertaining read, if nothing else. And I commented on that to thank them very much for this tool, because they figured out all of the hard stuff that I didn't have to. And if you want to use this, it's actually quite simple to use. If you're using Nix, it comes as a flake with a configuration module, so you can wrap packages and augment the way they use XDG Open. So in this case, Slack is wrapped with this modified version of XDG Open. And it also has a means to configure these URL patterns, what it calls proxies, to say these URL patterns should be opened by this browser. And if you're using any other Linux, it's just a shell script, and you need to place it in your path somewhere. And then you can run it with a series of match rules. You just run XDG override -- match, and then some kind of pattern that you're interested in, and then which browser that pattern should open with.
You said earlier that doing this injects something into the path of the application. Does that mean that it's you have to do something to the desktop file or the executable so that it knows to use the new version of XDG Open, or is there some magic it does to abstract all that away?
So it does do quite a lot of magic. So in the case of intercepting every URL that you want to open in, say, Google Chrome, when you're using Slack, it creates a whole bunch of temporary directories. So when you run XDG override, you say, these are the rules, and you should launch Slack now. So what it does is it scaffolds a temporary directory with all of these modified versions of XDG Open inside it.
So XDG override is the launch command for the thing where you want it to be intercepting URLs.
Exactly. Exactly. So when you're doing it globally for just open.spotify.com, that should always open in the Spotify client. YouTube.com should always open in FreeTube, and so on. Those are, set in a global scope. If you want to modify the desktop files on regular Linux, then you can edit .local share applications and create your modified desktop file there. But on Nix, that little configuration module handles all of that magic automatically. So you get the modified desktop files automatically injected into the environment. So if you just launch Slack via the menus, it's already wrapped around this XDG override proxy. But I like this very much. It makes me very happy. I like the fact I don't have to think about things, and even when I'm in a terminal and I run a command that bounces me through Google Cloud's SDK authentication, it catches all of those, just whatever terminal I'm in, and it fires up the right browser, which has got all of the correct, credentials and things configured inside of it. So if you're in a similar situation where you have work-specific authentication flows you want to capture and direct through a specific browser, XDG Override is the tool for you.
I have been dancing with disk partitions.
Oh, because you've got a new laptop.
It's not quite Dancing with the Stars, is it?
I mentioned last show that when I bought my framework laptop, I didn't buy an SSD because I already had one in my previous laptop.
Right.
I wanted to transplant this into my framework, but I wanted to do a fresh install of Ubuntu because I wasn't sure whether I'd done any monkeying around with the system for things specific to the old laptop. And I might want to do things specific to the new laptop, to the hardware. And so I thought it'd be good to start with a clean base install of Ubuntu. The trouble is, when I had formatted that disk previously and done my installation, I had just done everything as one big partition with everything on it because I thought, hey, when am I going to want to change that? This is going to stick around for a good long while. How wrong I was. So what I wanted to do was move my home directory onto a separate partition and then have my root partition that I could reformat and reinstall. So this is the process of how I did that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone follows these instructions, but I was quite impressed that I managed to pull this off the way I did. So I thought it was an interesting story to share.
So this is you going from a single partition with everything in it, boot, root and home, to some sort of separated partitioning layout.
Yes, it's using EFI, so I'm not sure. Is boot actually in the partition then, or is it separate? I'm not quite sure how all that works.
I think on EFI systems, it puts the kernel and the initial RAM disk in the EFI partition so it can boot off it.
So there were 3 partitions on the disk, but one of them was all of the Linuxy bits and then the rest was boot stuff.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Why do you need to do this? I don't quite understand. Why not just put the disk in the new machine?
Because I had a feeling that I had done stuff to do with drivers and such on my old machine to get certain things to work. And I may want to do that on my new machine. I didn't want to have some sort of Frankenstein install where I'd been blacklisting certain modules and installing certain other modules, and that might end up stepping on each other's toes and things not working and me not understanding why. So I thought if I know I've got a fresh install and any instructions from framework that I need, I can follow confidently and know that's all I've done, I'd be happy with that.
Gotcha.
You should sign up to my Nix newsletter, but okay.
Well, I was going to point out it's not Frankenstein, it's Frankenstein's laptop.
Okay, Mark, what's your recipe?
So the first thing I did was fire up Disk Usage Analyzer and find all of the big files I downloaded and all of the Git repositories I checked out, which I didn't need anymore, and just go through and delete a load of cruft so I'd have less data to worry about. And by the time I'd done this, I had more than half of the disk free, which was very handy. So the next thing I did was to boot the Ubuntu Live installer system and fire up the partition manager and shrink the partition so it was less than 50% of the disk space. Next, I formatted the empty space as a new primary partition. So this was, as I mentioned before, there were 3 partitions from which had been created by the installer. So this was my 4th primary partition that I was allowed. So I thought, now there were several things I could have done at this point, and I'm sure everyone will be shouting their favourite disk partition framework management tool at this point. But the one I chose to go with was LVM because I've used that before and I know what I'm doing. So that had the greatest chance of me not messing everything up terribly at this point. So for that new 4th partition, I created it as an LVM physical volume.
So this is, you've deleted some stuff from your big single partition, and then you've used a tool to go shrinkify that down, and so there's some empty space at the right-hand side of the disk.
Yes.
And that's where you put the LVM thing.
Exactly.
Right, got it.
So I've now got an empty LVM physical volume. So I wanted to create a volume group so that I could create partitions there. It turns out the easiest way to do this with a GUI is to install KDE Partition Manager.
Oh, really?
Yeah, gparted, which is on the installer, doesn't appear to do anything with LVM. So I installed that, and that gives you all the options. You can select the basically you have a tool in the menus to say manage volume groups. You select the physical volume you want to be part of the volume group, and then you can partition it. And so I had a shiny new partition where I was going to put my home directories.
I love the way you said, I use the KDE tool, which gives you all the options.
Of course it does.
Redundant statement, yes.
Isn't that the tagline for KDE?
Yes.
We give you all the options.
Exactly, all of them.
So I did an rsync-a to copy everything from /home onto the root of the new partition. And then in my original partition, I renamed /home to /old home because I didn't want to delete anything until I was sure I had this all absolutely correct.
Yeah. Here's someone who's deleted all their stuff before.
Oh, yes. No, this isn't me running the Gentoo command line partitioner on my parents' desktop for the first time. Don't you worry.
Oh, yeah.
So I then needed to mount this on my original system because I wanted to make sure this was all working on the original laptop before I moved on. So I added a new line to etc. fs tab to mount the new partition as my home directory and rebooted. Oh, something didn't work there, did it?
What were you missing? Were you missing the LVM utilities on the operating system by any chance?
Absolutely, because I hadn't installed with LVM in the first place. It didn't have any of the LVM stuff, so it looked at the FS tab and said, "Oh, what's this then?" And the partition wasn't there. Essentially,
you're missing something important from the initial RAM disk there, I think.
Yeah, once I'd figured that out, I simply installed LVM2 from apt and rebooted, and it was all working. I could log in, I could see all my files. Happy days.
Excellent.
So the next stage, I moved the SSD to the new laptop. I booted the installer, went back into Partition Manager, and reformatted the original root partition as a new physical volume.
Mm-hmm.
I then added that to the volume group. So now I had one big volume group taking up all of the space on the disk, which I could then chop up to my heart's content and resize partitions in the future as needed with some flexibility without wasting any space. So yes, I was quite pleased with that.
Which file systems did you put inside the LVM volume groups?
ext4, because I know that works.
Yeah, I don't think you can shrink it though, can you?
Yeah, the original partition was ext4, and I shrunk that.
All right, excellent.
So yes, now I carried on with the installer, and I got to the bit where you say what you want to do with your disk partitions, and here I hit a bit of a snag, because the Ubuntu installer doesn't let you install to existing LVM partitions anymore.
This is the new Subiquity based thing that doesn't have half the options. Yes. Dear.
So you can say use my entire disk and create new LVM partitions, but if you say use existing partitions, it doesn't see LVM at all. It just says you've not got anything there. So that was a bit of a problem. So what I ended up having to do, I found out the Ubuntu Server installer can install to existing LVM partitions. So I booted up the server installer, installed Ubuntu Server on my framework, and then booted in and installed the Ubuntu Desktop Minimal package to install all of the desktop stuff.
Can we both refer you to the Frankenstein comment you made earlier?
Also, I would just like to say, when I was working at Canonical and we started the new installer initiative, this is exactly the user experience we were hoping.
And basically this worked. I ended up with it booting to the desktop and I logged in, and apart from a couple of very small things, it felt like I had installed the normal desktop installer. Those two things were, for some reason, it decided to wait 90 seconds for the network to come up when I booted, even though the network had already come up. There's a NetPlan service and there's a systemd service that both wait, and the NetPlan one could see the network and the systemd one couldn't. So I disabled the systemd one.
So I think what you should do is disable the NetPlan one and remove NetPlan and remove Cloud Init, because those are server things. And on the desktop, it expects the network to be managed by Network Manager.
Okay, right. That explains that, I think. And the other thing was I had to enable Splash in the grub config so that I got the nice Plymouth boot animation rather than scrolly text.
And I don't know if this specifically still exists in Ubuntu these days, but there used to be a utility called Task Cell where you could install sort of prescribed configurations of packages, and one of those was the desktop.
Yes. I did that by doing the apt install ubuntu-desktop-minimal caret.
That's the one.
Which I think is basically doing the task cell version of that package.
That is correct, yes.
Yes. Cool.
So I've often thought in the past, I say often, I've mused what I would do if I was in your position and I didn't want to, or I couldn't delete any files from my home directory. And I got almost as far as writing a thing that would resize my partition down, then move some files over and then resize and then move over and then resize and move. And I wondered how successful that would be and how far you'd have to go before you completely ruined the partition. But I think it could work. I think it's possible. Just iteratively move everything over and you just end up with a succession of resize, commands, I think. Someone should do that.
I don't think there's much of an audience for that.
He says on a Linux podcast.
Well, that particular workflow, I think, is niche, even for Linux users.
Yes, it's niche upon niche. So, are you happy with the install you've got and everything works? And
yes,
great?
It all appears to be good. So, yeah, I'm not going to touch it forever.
Until 2604, when the new LTS comes out.
Now that I'm a developer, I use GitHub a lot. Why are you laughing? And I often find myself having to do things in GitHub. And by do things in GitHub, I mean use my hand to move a mouse and press on buttons and things and wait for a web page to refresh. And I ain't got time for that. So I have started using an alternative way of managing my stuff in GitHub. And that's with the command line GH tool. And boy, oh, howdy doody, is it fantastic. I love it. I love using GH and I use it every day for speeding up doing stuff that I would normally be doing with a mouse clicking in a browser.
So my chuckle at your self-referential developer is because it wasn't so long ago you refused to acknowledge that you were a developer. And I love the journey that you've been on in recent months and the self-realization that you are, in fact, capable of developing software.
Well, steady on there.
Well, you are. I've been to nerdydaytrips.org. It's software you wrote and it works. So, that's good. And also, I shall listen with keen interest because I've been dabbling with GH and it does seem to be rather nice.
So, what I do with GH is there's a lot of stuff that I do both on Nerdy Day Trips, but also in work where I need to close issues or merge pull requests. And sometimes I need to do more than one of them. And ain't nobody got time for click, 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 merge, add a comment, blah, 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 blah. Ain't got time for that. If I've got 5 or 10 pull requests that I just want to merge because I've reviewed them all and I'm happy with them all, I can just run in a loop a little GH PR merge with the necessary switches in order to do the merge and then delete the branch that was originally created that became a pull request. And doing that in a little loop with a number, for n in 1 through 10 or whatever, you can just go bang, 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 bang. Now, sometimes you don't want them to just go bang, 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 bang. You want to have a delay. And so you can just put a little sleep in there. And I've been doing that quite a lot recently for things like Nerdy Day Trips, where I want to merge a bunch of pull requests that I've already reviewed and I just want to merge them all. And they're actually in a sequence because it's the only changes that are being made to that repo. So I can do like from 1000 to 1010 and it just loop through and go bang, 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 bang and merge them all.
This isn't checking out your repository from GitHub and merging and pushing. Is this doing stuff in GitHub in the remote repository directly?
Bit of both. It can do both. You can use GH to do the pull and manage stuff locally. And also, interestingly, if you are sat in a clone of a repo, then it will assume that's the repo you want to do it to on the remote. So if you haven't got a clone, you can specify a -r and just specify the org/repo name if you haven't got it cloned locally, and it will connect and do the necessary things on that repo. So you can do both. You can either use it to manage, stuff locally and, push and all that kind of stuff. It's not a replacement for the git command in any way. It's more a replacement for you clicking buttons in a web page, and it enables you to automate stuff. And so I have a whole bunch of stats that I gather on a weekly basis. And I wrote a little shell script that just runs a bunch of GH to get that data from GitHub. And one of the nice things about GH is it can output as tables. So it can, if you just do a GH PR list, it will show you all the open pull requests. You can filter that and say, only show me ones that aren't bots, like Dependabot. Or you could say, only show me ones from these developers, or don't show me ones from these developers, or whatever it might be. You can filter everything. But the neat thing you can do is you can make it output JSON. And once you make it output JSON, you can feed that into some other thing. And so what I do is use GH to get me a list of all the things that were merged within a certain period. And then I can use another GH command to iterate through all of those pull requests and actually pull down all the information that I want to gather about those pull requests that otherwise I would have to do by clicking through lots of stuff in the web page. It makes things so much faster, and I'm able to automate some of the analysis that I do about what goes on in projects that I care about.
So you showed me your use of GH several times over the recent months, and I've only just sort of got on the GH train. And for that automation, it's brilliant. I had a situation a few days ago where we had 60 issues in a GitHub repo, and we needed to add some additional information to a comment for all of them. And I was able to use GH to go and get all of those issues in one JSON object. And then in that object was the opening comment, which had the data I needed in it. I then wrote something that went and did what I needed to do with that data. And then once it had assembled the information it needed, it then posted a comment back to each of those issues with the information that we needed for each of them. And it took minutes to write that.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's like a stepping stone between like writing a shell script and doing everything with curl. The next step is using GH to use the GitHub API, because all it's doing is using the GitHub API. And then the next step would be to write a whole thing in something like Python to use the Python GitHub API. And this is a way that you can do stuff without having to resort to creating a whole thing with Python. You can just like run something in a loop or quickly bang out a one-liner that will get you a whole bunch of information from GitHub.
And is this something that you could use in like a GitHub action or something similar if you wanted your actions to do things like opening a pull request or merging a pull request or something like that?
Yeah. So GH has to be authenticated. So you do a GH auth, GH login or whatever it is to get your credentials. And then you could stuff that in a secret in GitHub and then use GH commands. I mean, there are already GitHub actions to do some of the things you just said, which you could use. But yeah, if you knew the statements that you wanted to do, you could manipulate the repo that it sat in or another repo. You could trigger something to happen in another repo, which is quite cool.
Up until Alan showed me all the cool things you can do with GH, the only way I had used GH up to that point is in my GitHub workflows for creating releases, putting the release notes into the releases and uploading the build artifacts and attaching them to that release. I know there are actions for it, but I found them a bit cumbersome to use. And in 2 lines with GH, I was able to accomplish the same thing, and it made much more sense to me.
One simple thing that I did was do a GH that pulled down a list of all the pull requests that had been merged and all the issues that had been closed. But I used an include with a list of the internal staff. So I could limit what I was looking at to the things the staff had done. And then I run the same thing and use an exclude pattern. So it doesn't show those. So I can see separated all the pull requests and issues involving members of staff who are paid to work on this thing and all the pull requests and issues that involve members of the community. And so if I want to focus my attention on the members of the community and the work that they've done and celebrate what they've done, or go and speak to someone and say, hey, thanks for this, and, like congratulate them or thank them in some way, it enables me to do that because with one command, I can just filter out all the developers and just pick out the community people. Once I've got the list of issues that have been closed, I can then use GH to iterate through them and pull down the entire pull request and the issues. And you can feed that into our good friend, an LLM, and ask it to summarize each one of them. So you could say, give me a summary of this pull request, or wider scoped, give me a summary of all the pull requests between this date and this date. So between Monday and Friday last week, show me what were the most important things or what happened. And because it can ingest all the plain text stuff that's in the conversation in the issues and all the text that's in the pull request and all the code, you end up being able to have something that's quite a rich summary with links to all the right people and links to all the right issues and stuff, just to create a summary of what happened that week. If you just want to have a quick summary without having to dig through every pull request yourself, it's quite helpful.
And I learned today that GH has a bunch of other functionality. So I often fork projects to create a branch, to work on a bug fix or whatever. I've written a little wrapper called fork project, and I give it the org and the project it needs, and it forks that project into my GitHub account. And if that project already exists, it does I don't know if you've seen it on GitHub, you can say sync with this, with that. So it does that synchronization.
Oh, wow.
And then it creates the branch. And I get a checkout immediately of the project I've forked with the branch name. And I know it's all up to date, ready for me to start working on.
Nice.
That's cool. I should also mention that GitLab has a command line interface as well. I went looking for that. I don't use GitLab much, but I thought I'd mention that because I know we'll get feedback. But yeah, other code hosting platforms are available. But yeah, that is one of the things that I always find. I clone a repo and then I monkey around with it, and then I think, oh God, I want to contribute to this, but I'm not in a fork. And then I have to go through the process. And if I can make it easier and part of my muscle memory that every time I go to clone something to have a look at it, I fork it first, then clone that down. That sounds like a brilliant idea. I'm going to have a go at that as well. Thank you.